Hello, and welcome to the second part of the lecture on language contact, Pidgins and Creoles. So we know Pidgins and Creoles are often formed in a situation of language contact. But what are they? What do they look like? What are the linguistic features of them? Like we said, it's hard to tell exactly where a pidgin ends and the Creole begins. You've seen these two examples, and you will see that the first one, the pidgin one, now got plenty money, no good work, sounds like very simplified English. And indeed, this is the defining feature of a pidgin. So pidgins arise in situations of language contact when two people need to trade, or where you have, in the past, you had slave plantations where people from different countries speaking different languages, they had to communicate with one another. But notice that it's restricted context. Those people only need to communicate for work or for business, for trade. So they're not going to try and learn a whole new language that they could speak together. So they are used in very restricted contexts, right? The speakers already have their first language. They don't want to learn another language. They're creating a simplified version that will be useful in the very limited context that they need to communicate with the other people. So for a pidgin to emerge, we need at least two different languages that are mixed together. And usually one of them will be the more important one. We call it a substrate language. So the grammar will mostly come from that language, and the lexicon will mostly come from that language, and it will be simplified, but it will be provided from the substrate language. So, like we saw in the example on the previous slide, the example from a pidgin really sounded mostly like English. So it's not really, it is debatable whether they can be classified as real languages, right? They are a method of communication using two different languages in a situation where the speakers don't know a lingua franca, they don't know a third language that could help them. So pidgins are very limited when it comes to complexity, when it comes to grammar. They have little or no inflectional morphology, so number, the difference between one thing and many things, like in English is marked with S, right? Cat, cats. Very often pidgins will lack that. Case, tense, so I did versus I do versus I will do. Those things are missing. Or also agreement, so I walk but he walks. All those morphological endings are very often completely eliminated in a pidgin. There is also less derivational morphology. There is less ways of creating new words. So new meanings are mostly created by putting words together rather than developing new words. So for example, you see here 3 words from Tok Pisin. You've already seen the example Mama belong me, which means my mum. Then gras belong fes means beard. Can you think how that meaning is achieved? Grass belong face, right? So instead of coming up with a new word for beard, we use a description. It's kind of a grass that grows on the face. Similarly, grass belong head means hair. Again, grass that belongs on the head, grass that grows on head. meaning hair. Grass no good, so grass, which isn't good, means weed. So where normal languages have many different words, Pidgins very often just put words together to describe what they mean. So that means there's fewer words. So there's fewer function words, little grammar, and a much smaller lexicon, fewer words. For example, I mean, you can imagine this thinking about the number of words in a normal, regular language. It's usually around 30,000, more than that. A pidgin will often have 1,500 or around that number. So there is a very big difference. Instead of creating new words, you learn only those limited words and then you put them together to create new meanings. So we've seen this again and again. We've seen this in children learning language. We've seen this in ape language experiments. Whenever language is simplified, what goes first is the grammatical features, right? Content words remain. Content words are essential for communication, but a simplified version of language will always lose grammar. So inflectional morphology, derivational morphology, and function words, grammatical morphemes. Now, creoles develop after some time that the pidgin is being used. So if a pidgin is used more and more consistently, that means there is a context where people need to use it more and more. And that means that it becomes more and more complex. New words are developed. Grammar is developed. And so creoles are structurally much more complex than pidgins, and they have more vocabulary and they allow speakers to form new meanings. They very often, so pidgins emerge from a mixture of two languages, right? But a creole developed from those pidgins might have syntactic things, syntactic features that don't come from any of the two languages. So might develop its own grammar, not English grammar. And of course, this usually happens when children learn a pidgin. So adults will speak a pidgin and it will never develop as a creole. But when children are born in that context, when they hear pidgin around them all the time, then they listen to pidgin as their first language, they actually add complexity. They create the new grammar and they make the pidgin to develop as a full language, so a creole. And you will see this in many places where there was very long language contact, in Africa, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and the South Pacific, wherever two languages coexisted and interacted as a pidgin for a long time. And so this is very interesting from a linguistic point of view. How do creoles emerge? What does that mean for language acquisition? And I will tell you more about that in the next part of the lecture.